on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
A weed is obviously just a value that's placed on something that we've decided is bad. But a true invasive plant will go into, and they will persist in areas that are not necessarily disturbed by people.
People are constantly saying to me, like, well, why don't you start a garden? It's like, it's a lot of work. I really like foraging.
If you didn't like something, it might be that you're not picking it at the right time. There's a peak season, depending on what you're trying to do.
I would love to see Japanese knotweed in the context of where it's from, because here it's just so aggressive.
Conservation groups, municipalities, organic farmers, Audubon Society, they all have stuff they don't want, and they don't have enough people to take it away.
There's 3 times as much of the U.S. planted in lawn as in corn. It's staggering to hear. It's such a waste of space.
I am doing some seed saving and some planting, and I don't do only wild stuff. It ends up being a mix of things, and that's kind of fun.
Episode 139 of the WildFed podcast, The Meadow Doctor, with Tama Wong, is brought to you by Surthrival. You've got to try the new naturally flavored colostrum from Surthrival. Chocolate with real cacao, vanilla with real vanilla extract, strawberry with real strawberry juice. I've been using colostrum daily and promoting it as a powerful nutritional supplement for over 15 years. In fact, I just had a quarter cup in my blended drink this morning and again this afternoon. With its ability to fortify your immune system, nourish and rebuild your gut lining, repair injuries, aid in muscle growth and recovery, and so much more, I think it's one of the most sophisticated food-based supplements we can include in our diet. Surthrival's already known as the #1 source for premium colostrum, and now they've just released 3 new formulas: chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. They're lightly sweetened with monk fruit and combined with MCT oil to make them more soluble in water and in blended drinks, all while having the same potency as Surthrival's original colostrum. They're so good, I keep eating them by the spoonful right out of the tub. Eaten like that, they're like a powdered ice cream, but of course they make excellent blended drinks too. Again, these aren't those over-the-top fake flavors you taste in so many supplements today. These are flavored with real cacao, vanilla, and strawberry, so they taste great and really clean too. Go to surthrival.com to see the entire lineup of health-promoting supplements and superfoods, and use the coupon code WildFed for 5% off your order. Surthrival. Why just survive when you could thrive? Do you love mushrooms? Do you know that eating mushrooms is called mycophagy? Mushrooms are, of course, a cornerstone of the wild food experience, but learning about them can be daunting. Would you like to learn to identify and harvest mushrooms, but you aren't quite sure where to start? Then it's time to check out the North American Mycological Association. The North American Mycological Association has 97 affiliate clubs across the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, so there's probably a chapter near you. You can check them out at namyco.org. For a completely immersive and in-person experience, including lectures, workshops, foraging, and of course, mycophagy, you can attend their annual foray. The 2022 foray will be held in the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. Again, go to namyco.org to register. When you do, mention WildFed and you'll get a free copy of Maxine Stone's book, Missouri Wild Mushrooms, when you attend. Again, go to namyco.org to get started. The North American Mycological Association, promoting, pursuing, and advancing mycology. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Before I get into today's episode, I wanted to let you know a bit about what I've been up to lately. If you follow me on Instagram, you may have noticed I've been pretty quiet on social media lately. Well, things have gotten pretty busy because in addition to filming for season 3 of WildFed, Avani and I have also been raising a litter of Plothound puppies. I've got 5 puppies at home who are now 7 weeks old and currently weaning. They came out of my dog Ellie and a beautiful Plothound sire from Vermont named Trey. I'm sharing this because there's still a couple of puppies looking for homes. If you're interested in getting a puppy out of my personal pack, contact me at info@wild-fed.com with some information about yourself and why you think you'd be a good fit for one of our pups. We'll be interviewing the most suitable candidates soon. These are, of course, excellent hunting dogs, though you don't need to hunt with them. Rather, just have a lifestyle that suits these loyal, hardworking animals. They need a lot of regular exercise and mental stimulation, but I can attest to what excellent family dogs they make. So if you're looking for a hunting companion or a family dog from an outstanding bloodline that comes directly from me, give us a shout at info@wild-fed.com. Now on to today's show. My guest today is Tama Matsuoka Wong, aka the Meadow Doctor. She's a commercial forager, weed eater, lawyer, and mother of 3, as well as the developer of a commercial wild food beverage made with sumac, which we'll discuss later in this episode. She's also the author of the backyard field guide and cookbook Foraged Flavor, which was nominated for a James Beard Award back in 2013. Her story is really unique in that prior to her life as a commercial forager, she was a Harvard Law School graduate who worked 25 years as a financial attorney in Tokyo, New York, and Hong Kong. Not that these two lifestyles have to be mutually exclusive, but they probably couldn't be more different. It's a testament to the attraction that the land and the wild things that live there can have on us, even when our lives take us deep into the built and urban environment. I'm reminded that foraging is no longer just the realm of Birkenstock-wearing bush hippies. I mean, it still is, of course, but it's now for a lot of other folks too, because when you get down to it, foraging is a fundamentally human action. And like the mythic siren song, wild plants call us back to the earth in a way that, for some of us, even high-powered attorneys, is often irresistible.
Tama Wong, welcome to the show.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to speak with you.
I really appreciate you taking the time. I was just watching your TED Talk, and you have such like a really fascinating backstory that led you to foraging. I'm sure you've talked about it so much in media appearances, but could you give us a little bit of that backstory?
So actually, I am back where I started. So I was born in New Jersey.
Oh, okay.
And my mother is Chinese and born in Hawaii, and my father is Japanese, born in Japan. So I think that influenced me a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I went and moved away. You know, people have to work. I went to school. I moved away. I lived in New York City and in Japan and in Hong Kong for probably almost 20-something years.
And when you say you went to school, you went to Harvard Law? Like, you know,
Yes,
school,
not in
you
New
know.
Jersey.
I went to school. Sounds pretty rigorous to me. So you went to Harvard Law, and then what was the work you were doing overseas?
So I was in financial services, and I was first in commercial banking, and then I was in investment banking. I don't know if that really makes a difference. It's like it's sort of as the markets in Asia, for example, develop from your bank to basically securities things and bringing electric power companies to market and things like that, and your trading. All this was kind of developing around the time I was there, so it was super interesting and unpredictable.
You were working as an attorney in that field?
Yes, I was working I was sort of like the regional general counsel, but I was also sort of part of management. So it's not really, you're not drafting documents.
Okay.
It's really more an assessment of, it's a combination of working with different countries and their cultures and their state of regulatory affairs, as well as trying to make sure that you're kind of implementing and addressing any risks. So it's kind of both conceptual and operational. Is super interesting.
In all the videos that I've seen of you, you're, like kind of traipsing through a field with a basket, like picking at things and eating. And, it's just not how I picture, I guess the entry point into foraging is really fascinating to me from that world, and just the contrast between that lifestyle that you were living and what you're doing now. So how did it come to be that you start foraging and then become this advocate for weeds and for eating weeds?
I mean, I think it's always easier to look backwards, right? Because at the time you're just kind of living your life.
Mm-hmm.
But if I look backwards, I'm actually gone back to where I was from. I mean, so when I was small, my mother was foraging, and my mother passed away um, in 2020, and I
Okay.
had to go through all her things, and she actually had some of the same foraging books, only she had the first edition.
Oh, really? That you have now in your library, you mean?
Yes,
Oh,
yes.
cool. Was she in Hawaii?
Um,
Doing that in
no,
Hawaii?
no, she came to New Jersey. She
Oh,
came to
okay,
New
gotcha.
Jersey, but she was kind of new age-ishly, I guess I'd say. And my father's a scientist, so
Oh, okay.
um, and he's Japanese. So for Japanese, all things nature and asymmetrical are what life is about, right? So he was, and his science he did was more like, what is the nature of things? Like what is the nature of a material, or what is the nature of a cell? So it was very like basic science.
It's interesting. One of the things that I saw watching your TED Talk was some of the weeds that you were talking about are popular in both traditional Chinese and Japanese cuisine. And it's interesting to me to see when things are, because even amongst foragers, some of those plants here are not that necessarily that popular. And then seeing that they have uses, in other places, other cultures, is fascinating to me because, like for instance, Japanese knotweed is one that comes to mind that I saw you talking about. I just wondered if you could say a little bit about that because, that's one here, for instance, that some foragers eat, but it's not necessarily. I wouldn't say it's popular amongst foragers. And then to see it has like a place in cuisine somewhere else or where it's from, it's fascinating to me.
Yes, like I guess for me, I probably came about it because because Asia has a huge, not only history, but people are still doing this now. Only nobody really calls it wild, and nobody calls it foraging, or maybe they do now, right? But it's just kind of like normal.
Okay,
So, and I'd also have to say that and I know we're kind of skipping over the backstory stuff, but whatever.
we'll come back.
Um, okay, so I mean, getting on to like how the Japanese knotweed, I mean that actually was a light bulb moment for me. So, um, partly we came back to New Jersey, and part of it was because my youngest daughter had really bad allergies, and I was in Hong Kong, and it was getting very, very urbanized. So we
Okay.
came back, and we were living on this kind of, acreage and trying to fix it up. And so I really started about stewardship, like how do you steward something? I knew didn't want to wreck it. Um, and friends or people, our neighbors around us, there's a lot of naturalists, conservation people, etc. I'm in the rural part of New Jersey, Western New Jersey, towards
Okay.
Pennsylvania,
Right.
not on the turnpike. Um, and so they explained to me that, not all green is green, right? Like you want a kind of diversity and balance. And so there was one huge stand of Japanese knotweed. And they're like, you better like take care of that, and make sure, because it can take over, under your foundation and take over everything, blah, blah, blah. So I was kind of cutting it down and cutting it down. And then, I mean, I have kind of developed ways to kind of work at it. Um, and then my father had some professors over, and they came over to my place, and they were like, oh, Tama-chan, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm getting rid of these horrible these horrible plants. And I did notice, Daniel, that a lot of Asian plants they're calling, like, it's, why is it not just knotweed? Why is it Japanese
Oh,
knotweed,
right.
right? Like, do we call it like European garlic
Yeah, right.
mustard? No,
Right,
right?
right.
Why do we call
Swedish
it, or
mustard.
Japanese honeysuckle, right? So,
Yeah.
but so this became very clear because I was saying, they were like, oh, this horrible thing. And I said, yes. And I forgot, I don't know, I forgot they're Japanese, from Tokyo University. And I said, it's Japanese, not weed, right? And then they were like, oh, it's Japanese. And they were so apologetic, and we're so sorry, this thing from Japan, people
Oh
hate it, and
no.
they're, causing all this trouble. And they were kind of like sort of bowing a little bit and
Oh
apologizing. We're so
no.
sorry. I know, right? And then they were
Uh-huh.
kind of talking. They were talking to each other, kind of whispering, low in Japanese. And then they said, but guess what? In Japan, we eat this. This is like something that we enjoy eating in the spring. We eat
Oh yeah.
we eat it. It's part of our tradition. We're still eating it, today. And that's when I was like, this light bulb went off that, things that that we're thinking are really bad. I don't have to feel so depressed about having all these weeds, but actually they're being enjoyed in some other place in the world.
Wow. In your TED Talk, you discussed sort of initially trying some gardening when you first settled into that house, and you had me rolling around because this is how I feel about gardening too. People are constantly saying to me like, "Well, why don't you start? You got all this huge yard. Like, why don't you start a garden?" It's like, nah, it's a lot of work. I really like foraging, you know. So maybe you could just say a little bit about that as well, because it sounds like that's what you were trying to do initially, all, I assume, relating back to your daughter's allergies.
And I have kind of a different take on this now, but I'll just answer. So I always kind of, when people say, how did you start foraging? I say, because of the failed gardener. Like everything I tried to
Right.
plant died. But now I'm actually thinking that's because of people's definition of what a gardener is, right?
Oh,
Like they
yeah.
think a
Okay.
gardener has to follow this kind of plan and it has to look a certain way. But
Hmm.
in that world, I was a complete, failure. I tried to plant things, it didn't work, everything. So then I started looking at what was there. And of course, in between that was this happening with the professors, as well as my in-laws are Chinese, and they would come over and just go crazy over everything. So in between all of that, I started not feeling so bad about my lack of gardening talent.
What about today? Like you were saying, sort of you have a different feeling about it now?
Well, I've kind of come about some kind of gardening because, see, I think that these categories where we think that, foraging, like you said, you had an idea in your mind of what I was doing and what I'm doing now. And I have a lot of people that want to come out, usually from New York, and they want to come out and get into the wild, right? So they want to come
Hmm.
into the wild and they have this idea of what it's like, and I have an idea of what I do. And it's not it's not really these defined categories of
Yeah.
you're traipsing around, like I really don't want to walk around for like 10 hours looking for like one mushroom or something, right? So there's a kind, and I think most people will agree with me around the
Mhm.
world, right? So you come up with ways that, yes, I am doing some seed saving and some planting, and I don't do only wild stuff. But
Mhm.
it ends up being a mix of things, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah. What's your gardens like now?
Um, well, I don't really have any more invasive plants on my place. So now I've had to go out beyond my place to get
Oh,
more
wow.
invasive plants. So, I'm now one of the things that I'm I'm actually supplying a number of places wholesale basis in New York City, which is a huge market. So I'm doing this commercially, and I think when you do things commercially, it's different
Yeah,
than when you do
definitely.
something for yourself. So number one, I think you have to be more conservative
Mhm.
in terms of like I need to find that it was documented as being consumed by humans, right? So it's going to the public, not just for me. Number
Mhm.
two, I have to also be more conservative when it comes to sustainability because I'm not just picking one thing.
Right.
So I
Right.
follow a sustainability code um, in terms of how I do things. So I guess what I'm saying is now invasive plants, I kind of work with, and I always kind of had these relationships. So they go back maybe 2 decades now, but I have relationships with conservation groups, with municipalities, with organic farmers, with Audubon Society, and they all have stuff they don't want, and they don't have enough people to take it away. So we have a team, and then, I actually have some people and I'm saying like, this is how you can recognize this invasive plant, and this is how you harvest it or take it away sustainably without spreading it. And that's some talent you can use in the future. Like people are going to want that.
Yeah. Wow. I'm curious to hear a little bit about commercial foraging in New York. So that's for the restaurant market?
It's restaurant, but it's also, especially since COVID, it's also certain types of forward-thinking wholesalers, I'd say.
Okay. What kind of things would you be like providing as an example?
It's different. Well, it's different. And when all the restaurants shut down, you see this whole surge on people needing more stuff and then going, so then I was like the packing queen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The I noticed on your website you've got this product called I Am a Weed, and it's
Oh,
a beverage
yes. I
made from
have to
sumac.
smile when you say that because that's kind of my baby right now.
Is it? Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
really. That's really awesome. So, is that? I would assume that's. Is it Staghorn sumac? What's the sumac
Yeah.
that you're using?
Okay. So if you ask me what's my favorite plants. That's my favorite plant.
Okay,
Um,
I'd love to hear about it because it's a plant that I'll occasionally mess with, but seeing it as a beverage really lit me up. Maybe like start at the beginning of the story, like how this came about, and maybe tell us a little bit about the plant for folks who are listening who aren't familiar with it.
okay, well, I mean, there are different kinds of sumac, and you can use other sumac, like smooth sumac. Um, I think fragrant sumac. But I find for my purposes, again, that the Staghorn sumac is better, both because it has kind of more volume. It's kind of a little
Mm.
fluffy, and so I also make a spice out of it too.
Out of those
Um,
big red kind of like fruit clusters, right? Or they're like a
yeah, it's almost
fruit cluster.
impossible once it's in fruit, which is when a forager be looking at it, to make a mistake unless your color. People always think though that's poison sumac, and poison sumac is not red; it's
Yeah,
white, and
and it's
it
not a
grows in different
sumac.
places. But that's so easy to tell the difference.
Right, right. But we're talking about this sort of, I don't, would you call it a shrub or a small tree? It's probably a shrub, right? And
I'd say it's more like a small tree, but
small tree.
again, those are just categories, right,
Yeah,
Daniel?
made up category. Big red berry clusters though that are fuzzy, and when you taste them, like a real strong hit of
So yeah, so
lemon
the really
acid.
interesting thing, I did my original book back in the day, which is a complete surprise, not unplanned. Um, but I brought the first person that I brought sumac into the chef was Daniel Boulud and Eddie LaRue, and they immediately knew what it was and like how
Okay.
to work with it, other than just dunk it in, which you can totally do, dunk it in water and then strain out the hairs, right? But they were all super, super, super excited, um, and the interesting thing was that I'd say universally, and I work with people from different cuisines, and I don't work with a lot. So there's like New American, Italian, Korean, Laotian, Thai, French, Nordic, so bartenders, pastry chefs. So it's different.
Wow.
It's really interesting, but 100% love sumac. And the interesting thing, I mean, because I'm not really planning things, I think the difference between a forager and a farmer to some extent is a farmer plans things out now, right? Well, not that we
Mm,
don't plan, but they plan things out and they have to buy all these inputs. And a
right.
lot of conventional farmers have to buy, you know, the seed and whatever the mulch and the fertilizer, all this stuff, and so you take on your farm credit loan to do that, and then you need to sell all that stuff, otherwise you're in debt.
Yeah, that's true.
So the thing about foraging is that there's so much stuff, and then you don't have to really. We plan things, but I don't have to go and buy a whole bunch of inputs.
Yeah.
So if it's not good, then I'm like, well, we're not going to pick it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
It's not like I picked it, so it has to be harvested. So if
Yeah.
it's not better, then I'm not going to pick it. So the thing about sumac was it's actually better. Well, at least people here think it's better. I'm not sure if everybody in the Middle East thinks it's better because they're used to theirs, but it's a different. So if you look for sumac in the store as a spice, and there's a lot of sumac recipes out now, um, and you buy that sumac, that is a different species. It's Rus coriaria.
Okay.
It's not,
Same
and it
genus.
grows, I think, primarily in the kind of Mediterranean, Middle East, but the primary grower of it is Turkey.
Okay.
So if you see sumac on the shelf, it's mostly coming probably from Turkey, um, and it's very, very sour. And so a lot of times when you see it, you wouldn't use it in a drink, right? Because it's also called the vinegar tree. It's very sour, but
Mm,
it tastes, it tastes good. Like if you cook it on a bread and then you bake it, then it kind of reduces that sourness. Whereas the American sumac has this complexity where it's tart but not sour, and it has kind of these sort of a little bit of berry and nut notes in there. It's really, really nice, and there's a complexity. And the tea thing I didn't make up. That was like Native Americans have been drinking it into tea over the winter
mm-hmm.
for a long time. You can sort of see it in there. So, but you can see why probably the sumac that's in coming from Turkey would not be the best sumac to make a tea from, unless you did something. It's going to be like just really sour.
They make some. Is it za'atar? Is the spice that's or one of the spice blends that's made with the sumac you're talking about, the Turkish sumac?
Yes, you can, and also it's confusing because za'atar is also the name of an herb that tastes like oregano, which I
Oh,
love.
okay. I didn't know
But
that.
so then there's different, and I'm not the expert, so I'm not going to try and go into it. But it by different people are using za'atar for different things, and then za'atar. Sometimes people that use za'atar as a spice, they each have their own recipe for it.
Okay.
But they do use sumac in it and some kind of a nut. Like I do sesame, thyme, and sumac, and it's great.
You
American
use
sumac, of
American
course.
sumac,
Yes,
yeah.
of course. Well, none of the chefs that I'm supplying sumac are using
Yeah.
Turkish sumac at all
Right.
anymore. They're just like, part of like my frustration is that I always have like permission. I'm on this farm. The farmers hate it. And I'm picking this with my daughter, right? If the clusters, and some guy comes over and he's like, oh my gosh, I think it was the neighbor of the farmer or something. He's like, that is the most poisonous thing there ever is. What are you doing? I'm some crazy Asian mother or something, right? And he's like, that is really poisonous. I'm like, no, it's not. We've already tried this. And he's like, I'm telling you, you're going to get poisoned, have to go to the hospital. And he's like screaming. And then, all along I-95, I just, my heart turns over because I see them spraying tons of all the sumac along the highway. Because I don't
Oh,
know, they think it's tree
okay.
of heaven or poison sumac. I don't know who's come up with this, but they're spraying it all.
With glyphosate or something?
I don't know. It could be stronger. I mean, I don't know who's in charge. I would love to know who's in charge of the
Right.
spraying along I-95. And so I see these things, I just like, ugh, this is like my normal, what I think about. And then there's all these farmers that hate it. They're like, this is, and the thing is, they all think it's poison sumac. And it's like the worst weed. They call it invasive poison sumac.
Okay.
So, I talk to people in the communities and, I mean, so this is kind of where I kind of come out why I'm doing what I'm doing in a way. Is because I can talk to people till I'm blue in the face, one-on-one. I don't care, 20-on-1. I did this talk, but it's still I'm not going to get there, right? I'm not going to get there. People are still going to be doing this. So what's the best way? So I went to the farmers and we had my tea, right? And we give them the tea. I don't have to say anything. Drinks the
Right.
tea. In 6 seconds, he's like, wow, this poison sumac tea is delicious. They're still calling it poison sumac, but in 6 seconds, they already realize it's not poison sumac.
Yeah.
And I don't have to say anything because there's only so much I can do. I can't go around. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do.
But you've turned it into like a commercially bottled product, which it's got to be the first of its kind. I don't think I've ever seen anybody working.
Yeah, that's because it's like it's a huge amount of work, and
Yeah.
it's still work in progress, especially
Yeah.
due to COVID. So yeah, but
Right.
anyway, that was the idea. And then when it says I am a weed, it's supposed to be, it's about the plant, right? It's not about, it's like some people were saying, you should say Tamas something. No, it's not. It's not Tamas. It's its own, sumac is its own weed. And then on the side, it says, I'm a survivor. I'm resilient. I'm proud to be part of the future of food. So it's like, I am proud to be a weed.
Mm-hmm.
So just to make people get away from their kind of, sort of biases.
Can you describe a little bit like what you mean when you say a weed for folks, and also you call yourself a meadow doctor, and I kind of love to hear a little bit of you. You explain like how you mean that and like what that means for you.
Well, just on the definition of weed, I mean, there's been tons of people writing books on weeds, and I mean, for your audience, I'm pretty sure that most people are not looking at weeds as something bad necessarily, but people who aren't doing that are thinking of weeds as bad, and you can still see all these, like, if you go to like a big, Home Depot or Walmart, still see all these things like, I hate this weed killer, get rid of there's still out there in kind of mainstream. So, I mean, I'm trying to get out there.
Yeah. Right.
So, I mean, a weed is obviously just a value that's placed on something that
Right.
we've decided is bad, right? But when you talk about invasive plants, right? So then when you talk about invasive plants and weeds in that context, I think that's about the plant's behavior and kind of where they fit in the larger ecosystem.
Okay.
And I mean, I guess the main thing I'd be thinking about that when you think about an invasive plant, like I have heard some people say, what's the big deal? That, they're plants, they deserve like respect like any other plant. So I know there's some people that, turn blue at the sight of one or whatever, but I really think we're at the stage we're not going to be able to eradicate
Right.
plants, like especially plants that are such survivors, like an invasive plant. And by the way, sumac is not an invasive plant.
Right.
Just to
Right.
make that clear. But so, and a lot of times, I mean, people, I'm sure the other speakers have spoken about this, so I don't need to, explain how they don't have the same controls, et cetera, et cetera. They have amazing survival, methods, either through putting chemicals into the soil or rhizomes or spreading thousands and thousands of seeds. So they have all these adaptive abilities. But the issue is when, and then there are some weeds that they like to go where people disturb ground. Like they love, going in between the rows of farm crops, but that's about all you're going to see them. So a lot of a true invasive plant will go into a place that's not necessarily, and they will persist in areas that are not necessarily disturbed by people. I mean, maybe they are, but it's not like a farm field.
Okay. Yeah.
And then they have such adaptive capabilities that they can start to affect the diversity of that underlying landscape.
By outcompeting everything else you're talking about?
Well, if you've ever seen Japanese honeysuckle or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
literally covering the floor like a
The Japanese
spider web, right?
honeysuckle.
So, and then I talk to people, who are Japanese and Chinese, and they're like, "Hey, it doesn't do that back there."
Right.
I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like, I mean, they don't say steroids, but it is like it's on steroids. They're like, we never saw it so huge like that.
Yeah, right.
So that's what I mean when I say invasive plants.
I would love to see Japanese knotweed in the context of where it's from, because here it's just so aggressive. And
It's not. It just isn't doing things like that. It's not as huge. Yeah.
And, here our riverbanks are just being taken over by it. And once you get a patch in, I was actually curious, where you were able to control it where you live, because it's
Yes.
How did you do it?
We'll get back to the show in a moment, but first, hunting is as ancient as humanity itself. And through most of our history, it wasn't just a physical pursuit, it was a spiritual one too. One of the ways human beings came to understand ourselves and our place in the wild world that sustained us. Hunting is still an incredible tool for personal transformation today, helping you discover more about yourself, your environment, the animals you share the world with, and even helping you develop a deeper understanding of life and death itself. Hunting can help you find your place in the community of life. But you could hunt all your life and never find that kind of transformation. It takes deliberate practice, awareness, and sometimes even initiation. That's why my friend Monsell Denton created Sacred Hunting. Sacred Hunting brings new or even experienced hunters out onto the landscape to stalk, harvest, and field dress animals in a retreat-type setting in conjunction with sweat lodges, entheogenic plant medicine ceremonies, and strong intention setting that prepares hunters for a lifelong spiritual relationship with themselves, the land, and the animals they hunt. If you want to hunt as a tool for transformation, check out sacredhunting.com. Monsell and his team will guide you through beginner hunts, and more experienced hunters will find unique opportunities available across the country and globe. There's only a few spots available per hunt, so go to sacredhunting.com and complete their 2-minute application. Discounts are available if you let them know you heard about them on the WildFed podcast. Again, go to sacredhunting.com and learn more about Monsell and Sacred Hunting on episode 135 of the WildFed podcast. Now, back to the show.
I mean, I tried a lot of things, but see, the thing is, well, number one, I think part of the thinking, at least among conservation groups that I know, is you come in, or like they use the U.S. government or Weeds Inc., is you just come in and blast someplace with like Garlon or something. It's because glyphosate, if you spray Roundup with glyphosate, it's just going to sneeze. It's not even going to die. It's not going to do anything really, except maybe the leaf. It'll just grow back in the same season. So they have to use something really strong or a concentrated Roundup that you paint it on. And then it goes into the root system. But unless you're watching it like every year, and it's because it's rhizomatous, you're not eradicating it. And there's just so much land, and then, a lot of the chemicals are finding a lot of, issues with them, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I think there's certain plants that the main thing is, again, I said I was understanding how the plant grows. So one of the things you don't want to do with a rhizomatous plant is you don't want to pull it, like tug at it, because you're kind of invigorating that rootstock.
Okay. And it's that heavy woody stalk that it has too. I mean, that the rhizome is so
Yes,
tough
and the
and woody.
rhizome. The other thing is, when I've talked to, this has kind of been ongoing, but if you talk to people and there is some stuff on these government website which is kind of misleading, where they say like any part of the plant could, form a new plant, and they kind of mean the rhizome,
Yeah.
But some people are like, if you drop a leaf, if you drop a leaf, and so then they wouldn't, this is like a township I was working with, and so finally I had to bring, a PhD professor of plant physiognomy and have them write something being like, no, a leaf will not form a new plant unless you're using tissue culture or something, right?
Right.
So, but this is part of where, I think it'd be great for people to understand a little bit more, because even if you're a well-meaning person, you're not really understanding what's going on.
So how did you end up getting it under control? What ended up working for you in the end?
Okay, so I'm using the decapitation method.
Ooh. Tell me more.
So, and I'm not saying that, this is, and you'd have to do it every year. So I'm not saying this is a thing, but if you have a place and you don't want to spray it or whatever, and you want to use it, right? So then you cut it not at the node, right? So if you talk to a plant physiognomy person, they're going to say a node can also possibly sprout roots.
Yeah, because I've seen little
That's where the
roots
joint
form on
is,
there.
right?
Yeah, I've
Yes.
seen that
So you
happen.
don't cut it at the node. You cut it in between the node, and you cut it like about, I'd say, 18 inches off the ground.
Okay.
So what you're really doing is you're decapitating it. Like there's still enough plant there that you're not encouraging it to sprout out more. So it's still going to,
Yeah.
and I do this I've had really good results on Aurelia a lot with this too. And so it still tries to kind of come up, but you're not encouraging spread. So it's like, you're not giving it a crew cut.
Right. Okay.
You know how if you do a crew cut, then the hair comes back bushier? It's the same
Yeah.
idea. Like you
Right.
don't want to do that.
Right. Okay. So that's neat. So you're sort of tricking it in a sense. You haven't cut it short enough to stimulate it to grow, but you're keeping it from being able to do more
Yeah. So that,
photosynthesis.
yeah.
Oh, okay. That's really interesting. But yeah, that's something that you'd have to stay on top of, and eventually you're trying to exhaust that rhizome's energy or something like that, I guess.
Yeah, I obviously have a little bit too, but it's very small and weak now, whereas before it was pretty mature.
Tell me what you might do with it in a recipe. I'm curious to hear how you'd use it, and if you have anything to say about traditional use in Japan, if you were able to learn about what they do with it.
Um, a lot of times in Japan, they're using the same types of methods. So I have a Japanese foraging book in Japanese, and I had like my dad translate some of the difficult bits, but even he didn't know all of the things. So I have kind of a group of sort of Japanese grandmother types, and between all of us, they kind of, the problem is the recipes are all kind of similar, right? Like there's only certain ways of preparing it. So it's like ohitashi, which is kind of like a very mild sesame based kind of thing, or you're sort of grilling it. I myself find like the pickling thing is pretty easy, and that's what a lot of people use it as. A lot of chefs use it, but you cut it on the round, right? So you're cutting it crosswise.
Okay, little rings.
Yeah. So you have little rings.
Okay, and then those go into a pickling solution.
Yeah. And that's pretty much almost anyone will like that. Like the best place I had it was I actually had it with Laotian food. It was really good.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, it was really good. And then, obviously I do like the book with the strawberry cobbler crumble thing. Like it is good in a baked thing.
Yeah. Yeah. When it's real young like that.
I mean, I know that if you do pick it very, very young, where it's just a shoot, like it's probably less than 10 inches, that some people have been grilling it and like it.
Oh, neat. Okay.
But for pastry purposes, they don't like it that young. They like
Okay.
it much better when it's taller in the decapitation stage, I'll say, because it gets like a stronger rhubarby flavor only when it's a lot bigger.
Okay. When I was
So
a
I
kid,
guess
I
the
used to.
other,
Oh, go
yeah, the
ahead.
other thing which, I learn a lot from working with people who are sort of in different aspects of cooking is that, they're looking for a time. I think one of the things I kind of like to impart to people is that if you didn't like something, it might be that you're not picking it at the right time. Like there's a
Mm-hmm.
peak season for what you want to do, depending on what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
So, one of the things, again, this the same. I'll say Lena, so I'll make her listen to this. This plant botanist in New Jersey, we've been kind of on this thing where I find some new kind of chenopodium and I'm super excited and she comes out and IDs it and we're like all get excited about it. But so she came out and there was like purslane. This is at an organic farm that I forage off of. And there was purslane there and I was like, oh, there's great purslane here. Have some purslane. And she was like, I don't like purslane. I was like, why? And she's like, it's just too slimy for me. And I was like, I have never had purslane that is slimy, so I don't know what is happening. So I said, where did you get it? And she's like, at a farmer's market in New Jersey. So then I picked the purslane at the right stage, which it was at, and at the tips, and she took it home and she's like, it was delicious. Because think about any cultivated things and how it's going to be different and why we're picking any of them at a certain stage, right? Farmers are knowing when to pick things. The same thing
Yeah,
with
it's actually
anything.
quite precise. Yeah, it's very precise.
Yes.
Tell me about this idea of being a meadow doctor. I'm
Oh yeah, the Meadow Doctor. Okay.
quite
So I
curious
answered
about
that
what you.
question. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Meadow Doctor actually came before the foraging.
Oh, okay.
And that comes up, for me, it all started with like the land, right? The foraging just came about when I was like thinking that I was trying to get rid of like Japanese knotweed. So the Meadow Doctor was that we had this kind of fallow backyard when we moved back to New Jersey. And by fallow, I'd say like, it obviously was not manicured. It was kind of made up of some grass, probably some type of long grass, but it was kind of ill kept, it wasn't a manicured lawn. And I was walking around with some neighbors. So one of the ways I first started off, I just have all these people come over that knew plants, and I asked them what this was, and I take copious notes. I didn't have a phone. We didn't have iPhones then. So, but now today I would take a photo. And so then we were walking around, and it's a floodplain to a creek, and of course flooding is a big deal in the East Coast these days. So it's a floodplain to a creek, and we were walking around, and they found one plant. It was like an ironweed, which is a beautiful plant. It's not. I mean, it was used edibly, but I don't consider it as like the most delicious plant that there is. But there's one ironweed, and they said, "Hey, you should actually try and see what else there is in the seed bank."
Okay.
That's because if this plant is here, there could be more. It just needs to be encouraged. And so I just had someone mow it high until it got warm. And the first year, it was entirely white with aster, just from
Oh,
doing that.
wow.
So
Wow.
I think the really exciting thing was that you don't even know what you have until you just try and do something different. And the other thing was that I realized there really wasn't any resources, at least easy resources, that would show people they could do this. The only people who were trying to plant this they would spend lots and lots of money and they'd have to seed or plant something. Whereas this way really didn't take that kind of money. And so then people started trying to come in. get me to come out and look at their place and see what they had. And so that was the Meadow Doctor part. And I still have people asking me to do that.
Okay. But basically helping people gain access to their own seed bank in the soil where they live, and then letting those plants start to express themselves by,
Yeah,
not
or
having.
also, unfortunately, conversely, like, well, this lawn has completely been, I don't know what you have because you've been spraying it every year, whatever you've been doing, right? And there's
Right.
really nothing here that you can see, at least for now, but you could try a patch over here.
Yeah. I think you might have said in your TED talk that there's 3 times as much of the U.S. planted in lawn as in corn, which was like kind of staggering. It makes sense, but staggering to hear. Just sort of like such a waste of space, right?
Yeah, there was some really interesting map. I can send it to you at some point if I can find it. But it's really interesting because it showed that the actual, acreage of land use in this country, and you realize how much of it is like this kind of lawn, backyard, other types of stuff. And so that's why actually we as individuals and private households can do a lot.
Hmm. Earlier, we were talking about how some of the things that are just sort of considered noxious weeds here are really choice edibles and used in food culture, in Asia. And another thing I noticed on your website was several different medicinal mushroom tinctures,
Oh
chaga,
yeah.
reishi, turkey tail. And these to me, it occurs to me that this is another thing that, in Asia has been
Yeah, it's super,
highly
yeah, Asian,
developed,
yes.
Yeah. I just wanted to hear, what you might have to say about reishi and chaga and mushrooms like that, because they are so powerful. And I think they're so important today here. And, it's exciting. They're getting a lot more press than they used to. But just kind of curious if you have some things to say about any of those species.
So I mean, this is, everything's always a journey, right, Daniel? So this is something that kind of came together and when I say what I'm doing, we're kind of a group. We have a group of like-minded people. And what I kind of love about this is people can, and I'm sure because you're talking to, so many of them coming from all different backgrounds. But if they love plants, it's like such a common ground.
Yeah.
So some of the people it's part of our group, they're like, you know, super mushroom people. Okay.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
mean, I went out with them and it's like, I mean, I am short, right? And I'm kind of old too. And they're not that young, but they're definitely younger than me. And they're like this one guy who's so good at it. He's like 6'3" or something and kind of lanky. And one stride of his is like, 10 of mine. And he was like, oh, it's just up this hill. This other guy who was with me is kind of an older guy, but he's, pretty. And we were like, oh, great. Because it's right over here. Like, only 100 feet. And it's like, wait, that's like 100 feet, 90 degrees up that kind of cliff thing. Like, so it's very interesting to see like what different people bring. So I can't pretend to be able to cover the amount of ground that they cover. And they're like out camping and, when seasons, it's just like crazy. But so they're doing a lot of the mushroom, the hard work. I mean, I'll do like chanterelles in a little bit when it's around, but I'm not doing a lot of the bulk of it, right? But it
Mhm.
is still all within the region we cover,
Yeah.
which is probably from, I'd say, Delaware up through northern New York.
Okay.
Probably 5 to 6 hours. We won't go past that. It's like just too far and difficult
Right.
unless we're just in for a road trip or something. It's kind of it's sort of a bit nomadic. So we have to time it, right? So we're starting south and we're going north. But anyway, so the Chaga Reishi. So yes, there's a lot of talk about this. And of course, Reishi, it's a really, if you talk to someone in East Asia, it's like, my mother-in-law was like making my father-in-law take pills for like 30 years just so he wouldn't get cancer or something, right? So it's like it's just like a normal thing, like you would take vitamin
Yeah.
C here, right? It's not
Right.
like a big deal.
Mhm.
Um, and so then, or they call it lingxi. And our species here, and don't ask me on this, but it's a little bit different because it's under the hemlock things there, and there it's a different. So ours is tsuga, right?
Yeah.
Whereas,
Ganoderma
so
stuga.
you
Yeah.
probably know more than I do. But anyway, but it is found to have somewhat similar medicinal properties.
Mhm.
And of course, we're doing local. But the second part of it was how to extract. If you're using something medicinally, it's a little different than from a food perspective, right? Because you want to really extract certain types of benefits. And what I found was that they're saying a lot of different things all over the web, and different places were saying different things about how to do this. So it turns out my daughter is in medical school, and she was doing some clinic at a pain center where they actually did some of these studies. And I was like, okay, there's all these things, because now there have been journal studies that show the good effects from some of these mushrooms. And although they're still small, you can probably never do enough studies. And I said, so how do you do this? And she's like, well, just follow the lab. Like, if they did a thing and it was good, follow what they
Do it how they
did.
did it.
Right.
Yeah.
So then I was like, oh, but I didn't really understand. So she had to kind of show me. And, so it was with her help that I was able to understand the double extract method and how to do that and blah, blah, blah. But it's been good. And then, interestingly, oncologists now at fairly well-known practices, I've had people come to me and their oncologist has recommended that they take these.
Preventatively or like in conjunction with treatments?
In conjunction with, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, they wouldn't only do that only.
Right, of course.
They have cancer, like advanced cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard pretty amazing things about some of the species in, alongside chemotherapy, like preventing hair from falling out and things like that. It's pretty amazing what can happen there. Tell me about, before you said that when you're foraging, you follow a sustainability code. I was curious if you could lay that out for us a little bit, because so many of the folks listening are foragers, a lot of new foragers too, and people who always want to be kind of improving what they do. I think given that you work with so many restaurants and restaurateurs and chefs and such, it's like, I feel like this is a piece you have nailed down.
Okay, so, and in Foraged Flavor, which is kind of like an ancient by now because so much has changed, I do have the sustainability code for each species, but it's really very easy. So, and this is partly because I would see in a number of literature and people saying, oh, just when you go someplace, just take, I don't know, some percentage, 30%, 10%, whatever, right, of what you see. And that's probably where my lawyer background falls in, because I'm like, that is not a good governing principle. It's like the last hand in the cookie jar, right? Like everyone takes 30%, and then the last person is like, well, there was only one cookie, so I took 1/3 of it, right? It just didn't seem like to be a very good governing principle, and certainly not for business, right? So I don't really look at it as it depends on how much you see. It depends on, again, the plant behavior, right? So obviously, if it's an invasive plant, and please try to think about how you're picking it so you're not encouraging it to grow or scattering it all over the place. In New York, you actually, to sell an invasive plant, you need a license.
Oh, wow.
Because they're very worried about this. So an invasive plant or a regular weed, that's not native, like purslane, lamb's quarters, that's like pick 100%.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? It's opportunities. I'm sure if there's a seed bank, there's probably 10,000, 100,000. Definitely, if it's Palmer amaranth, there's like 1 million more seeds in the ground, right? So just pick 100%.
Wow.
If it's a native species, again, looking at the plant behavior, they call them kind of generalist. An ecologist calls them either a generalist or a conservative or specialist species. And that is just some, way of saying, are they not fussy? Like they'll just grow anywhere. You find them in the back of a parking lot on the side of the road or something. Or it only will grow under certain conditions and certain times of the year. And that's a specialist species. So if it's a generalist species, I probably will limit what I'm doing and be careful, but I'm not having really a problem of picking a fair amount of it.
Mm-hmm.
An example would be pineapple weed or yellowwood sorrel. If it's a specialist species, I really try to avoid it. unless I'm just doing maybe only fruits or something. But I'm very cautious about that because I want to be, because of what the situation is.
So for you, like plant like ramps, for instance, which are so
Yes.
popular amongst foragers, and obviously a lot of chefs want them, but I would
Do you want to
consider
hear
that to be.
about my whole ramps story?
I want your ramps rant.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Um, okay. Here it is. And I mean, all the chefs that I work with are so tired of hearing this, but I found kind of a in between solution. And I think it's gotten some traction, at least in New York. So, okay, here it is. So, I'm not really a foodie. I didn't follow chefs. I didn't try to market to chefs, blah, 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 blah. So, but after my book came out, they're all asking me and they want ramps. And so then my first reaction was like, this is really specialized. In New Jersey, there's hardly any patches left of ramps, right? The thing takes like years and years and years to mature. It's a spring ephemeral, meaning it's only out for a short time, and then it goes back. So it needs all that short time to get the nutrients back into the bulb until next year, right? And especially if you're digging it, we talked about disturbance, you're disturbing the ground. You're starting to see now what garlic, mustard, and all this stuff around ramps patches because people are
Okay.
running around digging
We have a lot of knotweed
indiscriminately,
near
right?
ours. Yep. Okay.
And there have been articles now, like academic studies done, which show that it's not really replicating itself. And I'm like, this is eventually going to, they have these ramp festivals, and I think they calculated like 1,000,000 pounds a year or some horrible number
Wow.
of
Wow.
ramps as being, and so, I was really upset about it. But I realized like people go and they ask for ramps, or that's what they want to see. And, they want to say something that says ramps on the menu, and they just feel guilty or probably hide it from me. I'd be like, "You're not doing ramps," and they'd be hiding it. Thomas here, hide it around the back, right? And I mean, I had like shouting matches with some people about this in my ramps rampage, and I even did some interview where some journalists came out, and they were in the car with the chef, and he said something to them like, "Yeah, Tama's fine. Just don't mention the word ramps to her." And as soon, of course, they came out, they said, like, "What's the story on ramps?" Okay, but anyway, so what I found out, and what the team has developed, or what we figured out, was we could try and come up with an alternative, right? Because you can't just say don't do it. You have to be like, not this, but this. And by the way, it's more sustainable, like that. So that was like what I tried to do, right? And so that what we're doing is we're picking one leaf per plant, right? So it's a
Yes.
spring ephemeral. There's 3 leaves, maybe 2 or 3, and you pick one leaf. So therefore, the other 2 leaves have the chance to get the nutrients. And actually, from a pure operational point of view, it's not that bad. Because you think, oh my God, blah, 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 one leaf, how hard is that? Because you don't have to spend all that time digging and washing.
Yeah.
So there's more integrity, right? So we kind of started doing this, and people moved over. I mean, I'm sure there's still people doing the bulbs, but I think I'm hopeful. But
That's
definitely people are buying one leaf only foraged ramps in the New York area. I don't know about any place else.
I'm glad you're telling me the story, because this is what we're doing here in Maine. We have a very small number of patches as well, and
Uh-huh.
that's just how I was taught by my botanist friend Arthur Haynes. Taught me to do it this way, and so we harvest one leaf
That's
at a time.
great.
And
That's really
it's such
great.
an incredible vegetable that way. Like, I never feel like I'm missing out on the bulbs. I really love to saute up those leaves. They're so sweet and delicious and
And
pungent.
when I try to ask, like, I'd grill chefs about what's so great about ribs. And, it's not like the bulb is that like unique,
Hmm.
really. I mean, they couldn't
Right.
really just like it, or they just like to pickle it. But like, I think you can live without that. Well, you can hear I'm on my like soapbox anyway. I mean, I've said this so many times to people that like, you know, anyway. But I kind of feel like unless I'm out there speaking up for the plants, who else is saying this, right?
Hmm. Are there any other plants that you have kind of like strong feelings like this about?
Oh, well, the sumac and the ramps are 2, as you can tell, like on the top of my head. When we talk about trying to, I think, your mission, as I understand it, is that you're trying to get more people to realize what is great right around them, right? Like the wild
Hmm.
food is right around you, and you don't, you're just missing out. but I think from what I can tell, there a lot of people are still very hesitant. They think it's weird, or it's going to be slimy, or they're not sure if they've identified it properly. There's still, I think, and unless you disagree, generally there's a lot of people who are like, not really,
Oh,
right?
nervous. Yeah,
So
very nervous.
yeah, so partly one of the things, if you see it in a restaurant and you eat it and you realize it's good, then you feel a little bit less. But it's also, that's why I'm working with some wholesalers. Like I work with some places that provide sort of local, sustainable, products to people in Brooklyn or other things. And so then they can see it. So and they can see how I've picked it and what it looks like. So I think that's a kind of way like, oh yeah, next time they see that, whatever, by their house or whatever, they'll be like, I know that because I got it in my food box.
Let's zoom out a little bit. I'm just curious, sort of as we wrap up, like philosophically, big picture, what's really driving and motivating you with all of this? Like what's going on beneath the layer of food or medicine? What's the big picture for you?
Right now, my mind is kind of on two things. The first one is time. I mean, if you knew me, I'm very obsessed with time all the time. There's not enough time. You know, I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. I really sort of live like that a lot. So it's like time. We don't have time. We really need to help each other because we're running out of time. If not, so time is a big thing. If we want to get these things out there or make change or have an impact, we need to be doing what we can now. And all the implications of that, which I don't need to go on to, which I'm sure other people have said quite well in all your, your podcasts and shows. And the second one is community. So I'm trying, people contact me and I'm trying to kind of, be part of a community that you're not just trying to do it by yourself. And so then you realize, like I said before, people have different talents or they have things they don't want. You have things they want. And how do we kind of form these communities so that you're not just someone who's like, hey, can I have, there's some relationship that's going
Mm-hmm.
on. And I think that's the way we build it.
This community of people you are talking about that you connect with, or like how do people plug into you guys? How do people work with you or get involved in what you guys have going on over there in that area?
That's kind of a good question. So, because I haven't really done it in a very, I haven't sat there and been like, okay, these are the 5 things that are people, and partly, I mean, there's a lot of people that contact me, and a number of people find it's not what they imagined it would be, and partly also, I don't really run a lot of workshops. I don't give tours. This is my, where I live, um, and so people that are part of the community are mostly people who are doing things. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think you learn the most by actually doing. If you really want to know, then you should be foraging, not just following me around.
Yeah,
So
right.
there's so many people coming, oh, I just want to kind of trail you,
Yeah, okay, gotcha.
right? I'm sure people say that to you, or they want to be on, So I feel like there needs to be more engagement in a deeper way than a lot of what people want. And so I think if there's any sort of way that I'm saying how do people do, it's like it's really how to get to that deeper thing. Because once you get there, you're stuck. You can't go back. Like people that once you get sucked in, you can't go back. Like people say they just look at everything differently. But you have to be able to, like for me, it's not just like a little blip, like I'm sure you can get that, but I don't have time to do that.
There's the time again. I
Yeah.
appreciate that philosophy a lot. I really do. What's the future like for you? What's coming next, and anything we should expect?
I am writing, but it won't be for a while. It won't come out for a while. But I am writing. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like everybody's writing. I don't know. It's the COVID or whatever got everybody. But and then we'll see. I don't know. From basically this whole past 2 years has been like week by week.
Yeah.
Um, if not only from just like what's happening with COVID and everything else, but just the weather. We're always paying attention to the weather, and it used to be that you could look a week ahead, and we kind of be like, okay, we're going to be here, and this, and then it was like by the day, and now it's like hey, nobody said anything. I'm looking at the weather. It's like pouring out and the weather says sunny.
Yeah,
So
we could
it's all
probably
about
expect
like
more of that.
risk. That's where my risk thing comes in, like plan B. We'll have to have plan B.
Thanks for your time today. You're a blast and a very unique character. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. Help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you can go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 10 episodes. Season 2 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2022. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.